Good morning, good evening, good night, Entrepreneurship and Leadership Channel listeners on the New Books Network. I'm here with my business partner and friend, Kimon Fountoukidis. And after lots of positive feedback of our previous episode, today we're going to focus on the role of ego in business. And we both think it's important for different reasons. And Kimon, maybe you could talk to what you think the stereotype of ego in business is and what your take on it is. Compare and contrast your view and the standard view.
I actually don't know what the standard view. I don't know what people think. I talk about ego, but I don't know if other people talk about ego uh, in terms of business. And I think we can broaden. We do want to focus on ego and what it means in various aspects of business, but it's also just understanding people in business, like who you're dealing with, and so whether you're a manager dealing with an employee who may or may not have an ego, or you're an employee dealing with a manager who may or may not have let's say, ego issues. I think it's super valuable to understand it because a lot of these things drive people's behavior. I think people underestimate possibly how much this affects different areas of business, because everybody thinks about like the people represent the company, and the company and the stuff that the person is saying and doing is in the interest of the company. But in my opinion, 90% or more, I'd fathom to say 99% of what really motivates people and gets people to do stuff is self-interest more than selfless interest. So I think that, for example, you think you're going to sell something into a company and you're dealing with that person, understanding what that person's like, do they want to be a hero of their company? Do they like how are you positioning your service or your product? Do they want to be a hero for their company? Are they trying to save their company money? What are they trying to achieve? And then how does that have their personal interests? Are they trying to get a promotion? Do they get a bonus for reducing cost by a certain amount, or do they get a bonus for it's actually it's more than ego is actually one component. It's something that you need to look out for, having let's say a big ego, but there's actually lots of components of people's personality that I think are important to understand in business.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Yes, I think for our listeners, just to give a sense of what's coming, we're going to be talking about ego in the entrepreneur's character and how it can either the way it works and the way they understand it can be to their advantage or disadvantage, but also in the team of people around you, in the managing of other people. And the reason I asked you to compare your take with the standard view is that I think that very often the media bigs up the entrepreneur as the guy with the big ego, usually a guy, not necessarily, because you certainly have women with big egos too, but the idea that they're center stage with the microphone and everyone's looking at them, and the successful entrepreneur has to be the center stage guy. And indeed, obviously they are, but why? And I know we share this opinion, Kim, and why do we think that well, why do you think that this is sometimes a mistake and can be bad for the business if the boss is the man with the big ego out there in front of the crowd?
I just think it's so super interesting what you brought up, actually, because, and sorry, I'm reflecting on, what I'm reflecting on, thinking to myself, actually, to become, I don't think it's a prerequisite to becoming a successful entrepreneur, but having a healthy dose of ego and self-assuredness and self-confidence is gonna I think it's quite an important component in becoming a successful entrepreneur. So here you have this interesting dichotomy, in my opinion, of like you need to be this kind of person. You need to be able, like, a great entrepreneur is going to be a great leader, is going to get people to do stuff, is going to be able to get people to go the extra mile. Very often people like that are probably going to have a big ego. So really, and this is where it gets like super interesting. And I think the genuine, let's say the creme de la creme or whatever, the absolute elite, they have that ability, but at the same time, they're able to check their ego. Because I think very often what happens when you get this godlike, I keep thinking of the guy from WeWork. What's that guy's name? Like that, like who's the WeWork? What's the WeWork guy? Like he was
I,
like the like rock star type.
Apparently, yeah,
Adam.
Adam Neumann, I think he was called, and I haven't.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know he's got such a reputation. People write about him the whole time, but he totally,
yeah.
you know, he is the sort of stereotypical big.
But like a rock star, right? He was like he looked like a rock star. He acted like so. And then it's like you know, it's very. I think you see this with professional athletes and celebrities all the time. People start to buy into their own BS, into their own story. And you know, it's great to pump people up, it's great, but no, they're not the know all end all very often of everything. And truly to be successful, you're going to be heavily reliant on other people. And it can't possibly be all about you. And that's where it gets where I started to say the creme de la creme, where the real talent comes, is the people that can get people to move oceans and move mountains, basically, that have that kind of charisma and have that kind of leadership, but at the same time recognize that you have to allow other people some space. You can't take up all the oxygen in the room. You need to be able, and you know when to do that. You know, and obviously there are certain times when you have to be the guy, you have to be the ego, you have to be the guy. But there's maybe a lot of times behind the scenes, the stuff that we don't see. That's where they're, you know, taking a second, you know, they're taking a step back. They're letting somebody else lead. They're letting somebody else's ideas come to the front. Because I just don't believe, even to like, I don't know what your opinion on Elon Musk is, but even take somebody like that who strikes me as somebody who can be very, who actually generally knows how to do stuff as well, like a lot of stuff. Like he's like sort of atypical. He's not just like a business, like he actually knows how engineering and actually stuff works. But even him, I have to believe, is taking a step back to the better rocket engineer and the better, you know, autonomous, you know, AI driving system or engineer or whatever. I'm sure there's like specialists in there. You know, he knows his stuff, but he doesn't. You know, he's not saying you need to cook this like this every time according to my recipe. It's just no way that it can possibly be like
Yeah,
that.
I think that makes perfect sense, and I think one of the things that leads into is how important self-awareness is. That, you know, different people have a different natural predisposition to liking being in the spotlight. That you get natural introverts, natural extroverts, or whatever. But you know, there's a time when, however big or small your ego is, and at some level, you've argued that everyone's self-interested, there's a time to be the person out in front, and there's a time, even if you've got a big ego, your self-interest is best served by putting your ego on the shelf. Because, well, maybe I know you've had a lot more experience of managing senior people over many years than I have, because I've changed role a few more times than you have. But when you're leading senior people, on the one hand, it's nice for them. They may want you out in the spotlight because it adds to the status of the job they're doing. On the other hand, what can be the problem if your ego is too big? And I think this is something you've been good at, because you definitely have an ego. On the other hand, you know when to keep it in check. What can be the disadvantages of being the big ego CEO, and as the company gets more successful, your ego just expands, and you get this sort of self-reinforcing bubble of big ego CEO? What's the danger there, do you think?
I mean, I don't know. It's you know, it's not. I don't think it's cut and dry at all. To be honest with you, I think it's possible to be that way and like again, I don't want this podcast into like dropping like the biggest names in business of all time, but I was just thinking about Steve Jobs and how uh, you know he had what the reality distortion machine or whatever it was called. Like he basically he made things happen that everybody said couldn't happen by just basically sheer force of will. It actually reminds me of Michael Jordan as well. Like just sheer force of like we're gonna do this, it's gonna be done. So I think there's people like that that are flat out assholes. I mean, like, there's no better way to call them. Like they're literally assholes, basically. But they're winning and getting it done. So the answer to your question, so I don't think so. I think I know where you were driving. That basically, obviously, you do need like for me, best practice. If we want to talk about best practice, is yes, it would be great to bring everybody along, give everybody a space, share the credit, show your business is stronger if you show that there's a lot of stronger people there and all that stuff. But I do think there's plenty of cases, unfortunately, in the world where you have the absolute just force of nature going forward and saying, we're going to do this and it's going to be done. And I don't care what's in my way. I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to, and there's going to be some hurt people along the way. There's going to be some dead bodies along the way, but we're going to get this done. So, I think for best practice, I would love to see people keep their ego in check, but I think actually quite interestingly, I think you can still be successful the other way. I just think it's going to be a less fun organization to work in.
Yes, yes.
Basically.
I mean, to pick an example out of fiction, in The Office, at least the British version of The Office, David Brent, the terrible boss, couldn't bear not being in the spotlight. And so even when a corporate trainer is in running some lamentable corporate training program, he sort of almost barges him off stage and insists of being center stage in all the role play because he wants to be in the spotlight and he can't bear.
He went home and got a guitar.
Yeah, but he went home and got a guitar. But the point was that it actually, that kind of ego, very strong ego, often illustrates a sense of fragility. It's because he's so insecure that he has to push himself out there. So for anyone listening, if you find that you get uncomfortable and uneasy when other people are in the spotlight, then that's a good time to take a good hard look at your ego, because the problem with that is that, of course, you don't give space for other people to be leaders and other people to develop and other people to feel responsible, because if you're busting them out of the spotlight, then they're going to be demotivated and frustrated, because quite often it's them who deserve to be in the spotlight, because the successful leader is obviously the person who gets the best out of other people, which brings me now.
I just want to tie into what I was saying before. I think that for the majority of people, it's a road to failure to go down what I described, let's say the Steve Jobs or whatever, just to be this ruthless. The only reason it works for Steve Jobs and probably for Elon Musk as well is because they're actually incredibly talented. They actually know a lot of stuff, and they're actually right enough of the time. But the real problem with ego is when you're not as talented as those guys, and you're just basically saying, we're going to do it this way, you end up in a bubble. And you don't know, like, if you're not allowing other voices in, and if you're not allowing because talented voices need to shine. They're not going to stay in your organization. If you're going to allow them in, then you're going to make better decisions. Some of these guys, I do think that they're the exception, not the rule. The ones that succeed with that model. I think you do need to basically, you and I actually often say this. I mean, it's like actually the real entrepreneur is the one that's super talented at getting way smarter and way more talented people than themselves into the organization and to work hard and to do stuff. And then, for God's sakes, if you are that kind of entrepreneur and you're not letting those people take the lead and shine and do all that stuff, well, you're making a massive mistake there.
And certainly, yeah, you're absolutely right. And this was a lesson I had to learn, because I still do have a high respect for my own opinions, and I often feel I'm right when other people disagree with me, and I like being right. And yet, if you are bringing in smart people into your organization, it's possible that they're going to disagree with you. And a good example of this is how people behave in group discussions in the company, and how consultative you are, because sometimes some type of leaders don't like debate in board meetings. They sort of try to rig it, so they'll talk to people one-on-one.
Or if there's a group of managers together, and
a group of managers, and the person in charge doesn't want people contradicting them or disagreeing with them during the meeting,
right?
because they feel undermined, threatened.
Yeah, that sounds horrible. I mean, that sounds horrible. Like, don't even bother having the meeting. That's just a fake meeting then. That's
right.
not even a real meeting. If people are having meetings and they're not able to speak their opinion or say what they think because the boss is going to get. But yeah, so it is true though. Like, it's interesting because like I always try to think when I was managing. I always just think I couldn't care about being right. That is being right. Actually, is all about. It was 100% about ego. The real question is this what's best for the company right now? Is this the best possible thing for the company right now? Is this how's this going to affect the short term and the medium term and the long term? Basically, every single decision needs to be looked through that prism, basically, and not through, oh, it was my idea, or I like, yeah. And I've seen this a lot, and this has beyond, like, this is beyond management, or sorry, leader, entrepreneurship. It's like people, but it's so interesting what you just said. It's like people take a position, and it's like they take a mound. They're gonna defend this position, whatever this position is. It's an idea that we need to do content marketing, whatever. I'm just gonna throw something out there, and we really need to do this, and they'll take that position, and then that turns into an ego issue. It's because I've taken this position, and and I've seen that and then you've got two managers who are taking positions, and then you have to deal with that. It's just, I think, but it's just not, it's not constructive, actually, for the company. And but
Yeah.
anyway, that's where
So
understanding ego is also important.
so if you're thinking about the ego of the people in your team who report to you, to either junior or senior managers, what sort of things do you? I'm trying to make this practical. What sort of things do you try to look out for, which either might be red flags that this might be a problem down the line, or people need managing. Sometimes you need to give them feedback and say this isn't a good behavior, or that it is a good behavior. But what is either a sign of someone being very lightly high flyer who's got potential to be a leader and grow in the organization, or on the other hand, the kind of red flag where you think, wow, that person's got an ego problem, and therefore I need to talk to them to explain why this isn't going to be potentially good for them in this organization.
Well, I mean, I think we're back to the beginning of what I said. Is actually, you want the people with the big ego. basically, and let's be careful, big, whatever. You don't obviously want people with sort of like major ego issues, but generally, again, I do believe that with an ego comes self-assuredness, self-confidence, ability to get stuff done. At the end of the day, my personal opinion about this is, you need to, I don't care. That's my answer, actually. I don't care. I want to get results, and I want these people. Let's see how good and talented they are. Are they really good at getting results and doing what they're supposed to be doing, whatever that is? If they're really talented at that, then the only other thing I care about is that they're not harming or impairing other people's ability to do the best that they can. So any conversations I may have is, so I would not go with the cookie cutter method saying, oh, you've got a big ego, you're out. I would say, as long as you can have a huge ego and you can say you're the best in the world and awesome at doing everything, if you're doing your job well and pretty much not bothering the other people in the company and are being successful, I'll find a way to incorporate you, because that I always find, like, trying to put people in these cookie cutter things is actually very limiting. You don't, you need to be able to work with all kinds of people, and people with big egos are people too. And there's plenty of benefits there, but it's about understanding, is I think where you're asking is understanding the damage that somebody like that can do if it's not. So you need to be aware of it, and you need to manage, just make sure that, very clear boundaries about what's the culture of the company in terms of being respectful to others, because I think that's generally the area where you're gonna run into trouble with know-it-alls and people that want to, they may be dismissive of other people and stuff like that. And that's the communication that you need to focus on now. And obviously there's cases where you need to fire people like that, but I would be like, I think talented people are, I mean, the whole thing is based on people, and talented people are obviously hard to find. So you need to find ways to work with talented people if they're not perfect in every way.
Yes, and to answer the question, I asked you the sort of things that I would be looking out for is if someone's bad at handling criticism, or they're criticizing other people in the organization, or when something good has happened that they're responsible for, they take it all on themselves, that I was brilliant, rather than if they start drawing attention to successful people in their team, like they're boosting other people, supporting other people, that I think these are signs that someone, I would draw a distinction between self-confident and big ego that I think possibly, we haven't defined. I think you studied psychology, I didn't. We haven't defined the term, but for me, someone who's putting themselves forward at one level is good, but another, as we've both agreed in this call, this podcast recording, it's about the organization as a whole. So I think there are some characteristics which can be sort of red flaggish in terms of which you've put down to to culture, I think, being critical. You don't want assholes in the team, basically. Full stop, end of story, do you?
No, you don't. As I said, but I guess what I was trying to say is I have a tolerance. I think it's, I think particularly as an entrepreneur, I mean, as you get more established, you can be more picky, maybe. But like when you're getting started, you got to take what you can get. And if you're gonna put people in cookie cutter and they have to be exactly like this, exactly like that, I'm just saying that there's a certain level of behavior. There's a range of behavior that's acceptable and that's unacceptable. And I think that, if you can, even if somebody trends on the edge toward unacceptable, as long as they don't cross the line and you make it clear about the line, they might not be optimal in a lot of ways. But I just think you need to be. Personally, I think that this is actually a very important thing for an up and coming entrepreneur. You're not going to getting people to can do stuff well. It's like should be your number one priority, and then I would be worried about everything else secondary, because I just think that somebody that actually wants to work with you in your young growing company and has talent, yeah, that's where you come in. That's where the skill of management comes in. How do you manage those talented people that are not perfect, maybe in some interpersonal ways? I mean, we're going on a tangent a little bit here, but I think but I do think it's an interesting. It's an
I
interesting
think
topic.
you've touched on something that's fundamental and incredibly important, which is the importance of managing people well. And I think it's obvious that it's obvious to us both. It's obvious to me and you that to manage people well, you need to know them, and different people have different personality types. And to motivate people, you need to know what motivates them. And some people are very focused on money and financial bonus. Quite often, the entrepreneurs under the skin is quite interested in the financial result, and they then assume that money is the key motivator for everyone else, which isn't true. Money is important, but it's not the only thing that some people care about, and some people care more, other people care less. So I think part of the reason to think about your own ego and the level of ego desire to be in the spotlight among the people who report to you in your team is in order to figure out the right way to motivate them. And some people will be delighted to be in the company newsletter, get their profile there and be on the company website. And the one thing that I was actually thinking of earlier when you were speaking was you have to be very sensitive that some people care desperately about their status within the organization and who reports to who. Their place in the organization chart is almost an issue of resigning from the company. They care more about that than anything. And I think that's to do with ego and insecurities. So, you can't always accommodate people, because in order to manage people, you need to be able to give them feedback and constructive criticism and know when to say no. So, Kim, let's just tangent slightly into the managing of people. That I've been saying you need to know ego. You've been saying it's more important that they do well than to understand that. Well, I'm not sure quite what you're saying, but you're saying the key thing is results.
I'm glad you don't know. I'm glad that you don't know exactly quite what I'm saying.
Well, and yeah, maybe that sounds a bit harsh. um, can you elaborate on the right way to manage people, taking into account their egos, but maybe that's not the only thing? What do you think if you want to get the best out of
I know. I
people?
want to touch. Before I do that, I want to touch on something you said, which is actually not. I actually don't think it's connected to ego, which is this caring about status and job titles and stuff like that, which is a thing, which is a huge this is probably one of the most annoying things for me as an entrepreneur. And this is just because I come from a different background. This is where I need to understand other people. Basically, I never had a job in any corporation. I didn't go through any of that. I just set up my own companies and did it as I thought best. But what I very quickly found was people really, really, really care about their title and their ranking in the system. They want to see a whole system in an org chart. They want to have it all thought out. And I'm the junior and I'm 3 levels up. And how many steps away am I from the CEO and all that? And I was just like, what the hell? Like at the beginning, I used to be like, hey, anybody can make up their own titles. I didn't give 2 craps about titles. But then basically, I had to start taking it more seriously. But I actually don't think this has anything to do with ego. I think this is like the rat race that we have going in our education systems and in just the general basically it's our education system. Basically, is we need to have structure and reward. And I know what the A comes after B, A comes before B, and one comes before two, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think that's how we've been taught and trained, like that, basically, as animals through the system as we come into work. And they've continued to add this system of, in these corporations, of you go after you want to get the bigger piece of cheese, you just keep going a little higher, you do this, you do that, do the other thing to get up there. So I think that's what a lot of people focus on. And while I kind of think it's kind of silly, you know, I've the companies I've been involved with have had to adapt, actually, and had to actually cater to this way of thinking. So I think that's just a total side note tangent that's not directly connected. But I actually don't. I think that the job title thing actually, my personal opinion, the source is actually the way we've been brought up and the way we've been raised and the way we've been taught what success means and how progression means, because everybody wants to feel like they're making progress. And so following some career path is a way of sort of saying I'm making progress.
No, totally. So basically, you've demonstrated a good example of why your robust ego was good for the organization. That you didn't care, but you didn't care about status and job titles, but because the people in the organization did, you had to modify to them because that's the way the culture is. And Poland, where most of the early employees came from, is a highly competitive. It's not just a Polish thing, but it's a highly competitive educational system where everyone gets a ranking, everyone knows how they've done, how all their the people they went to school with did. And I would argue that certainly in the case of my education, it was highly individualistic and highly competitive. So everything to do with like how good you were was measured in terms of a result. And I think people carry that forward into the workplace, which is very potentially damaging, because the best successful organizations are good group achievement, team achievement. Is you can't look at a Toyota and say I built that as one person. I don't know anything about the culture of Toyota other than they're a highly successful company, but it's the outcome of building great cars or whatever else they build, not the individual effort of an individual person that is the key to their success. But let's tangent back to the question I asked that you didn't get to, which is about bringing the best out of people in terms of your managing of people. What can you share about that? Because I think ego, knowing the
Yeah, I don't want to go too far away from the ego topic, but so I'll just, because that's a very, very, very broad question. But I think in the context of what we're talking about here, it's understanding people. And I remember at one point at Argos, we did the Myers-Briggs personality test. We actually did that amongst the managers, and that was fun. It was like, it allowed you to see, but basically the real value of it, I mean, apart from whatever this person is not, and like, this personality mixes well with this one doesn't mix well with that. But really, the real lesson was people are different. And people perceive things differently. People perceive communication differently. Some people need certain types of communication. Other people need other types of communication that maybe seem counterintuitive to you because you're this type of person. And just the fundamentals, let's say extrovert versus introvert. And so I think that is the big lesson. And that's sort of what I've been sort of touching on, is that like people are different. Just because you think a certain way doesn't mean other people think a certain way. And if you want to get the best out of these people, I assume you've hired them because they have certain talents. So you're happy with their raw talents and their abilities, but how do you get the most out of them? You definitely need to cater to these things. Now, whether if it's going to be somebody, as we said, somebody who's going to be driven ABC, how do I get up the ladder? That's one way to do it, right? But there's another person that's just fascinated with the puzzle. Like, this is just like the coolest puzzle. How to solve this problem. This is like I love this puzzle. And so like, then how do you give that person sort of the environment that they can do puzzle making or puzzle solving, basically? Then you have, you anyway, and it goes on and on and on. There's a lot of different types of people. And if you can sort of if you basically give people jobs that they want, where they feel happy and that they want to do it and they enjoy the environment, you know, stuff like money and stuff like that, they're important, but they really do become secondary. Like the most important thing is to be able to work in an environment and do stuff you want to do that's meaningful to you, whatever that means, because meaningful can mean different things to different people.
Yes, and you know, there's a point here that I think is really important in terms of recognizing that people are different. That sometimes, you know, the entrepreneur who starts, like I'm talking about the bootstrap, it starts, it's just her or just him, and then they begin to grow, and then they've got this idea of what they're meant to do. And I remember one startup I invested in that failed miserably, and the CEO, she thought, oh, whereas they hadn't got any customers, we hadn't got any customers. I was the sole funder of this business, and she started dragging people down to the park to play frisbee without any sense that this was, you know, what people wanted to do. And she just decided that startups should play frisbee. And so that's what she sent me these photos, very proud of herself. Look, I've got them playing frisbee. And even her phrasing, I've got them playing frisbee, like she had imposed her view of what should happen. And it was, and there's a very, and I think I'll there's a good solution to this problem. Like if you're trying to figure out the kind of activities to integrate people and bring people together, what sort of activities should you impose on the organization, Kimon?
Impose?
Yeah,
Oh, this was always this was always a challenge. I mean, like basically, I would say there's like I think there's phases of life and phases of a business, and I think that if you're young, if the company's very young and the founders are very young and people don't have kids and stuff like that, I think you can pretty safely just start out by going out to bars and stuff. Like now, over time, I've learned that not every just like I was explaining, people are different. Not everybody likes to go to bars, and not everybody likes to drink.
totally,
So,
totally.
but like going out to like that was like the basic thing, like because like people were young, you know, and single, and they, you know, people tended to like to be out with other young people, and so going to bars was like the easy way. But then it's so funny because as the company matured, as people started getting married and having kids of their own, the things they got that they were interested obviously also changed. Now you have, doesn't mean you didn't have any young people. Then you have different groups. You have young people that still want to party and do that stuff. Now you have like the I wouldn't say even older people, but it's like old people. I'd say older young people that have like they have young families and stuff like that. And so like how do you find activities? So like I've gone through various iterations of this. The best thing though I did by far, and I don't know why we're talking about this now, but anyway, the best thing by far that I did was in terms of ideas that would help get the company sort of integrated, but also sort of solve this issue of not everybody likes to party. Was we started to do sort of charity initiatives together. So we used to work with some local orphanages and just do various different things. I don't know, like a picnic and play volleyball. We took them once to the chocolate factory or whatever, did stuff with them. But what I found by this, so this was like a non-drinking event that actually that attracted another different group of people in the company to it. But what I found, and it wasn't easy to get the volunteers. Like it was never like more than like 10 of us at a time. It felt like it was like, and even though the company was well over 100 people, it didn't seem like there was ever more than like 10 people. But what I was fascinated with was even the people that didn't go, they were proud of it. They were telling people, you know what we do as a company? We help, like we go and we work with kids and we do this stuff. So it's like, so that was actually an integration without even actually doing the activity. The fact that this activity took place and was part of the company, people sort of who didn't do it grasped onto it and also felt like a sense of ownership and belonging to this thing. So anyway, high level, really, I would say it depends on the size of your business, but it's gonna change over time, and you do need to be aware that there's different people, the different things are going to tick different people's boxes. There's obviously old sports things, and there's a lot of different things you can do. I would have multiple things going, but again, what I really would say is that frisbee idea sucks, and if you're too small, you need to focus on getting clients and revenue because you're not going to be able to, like, all these things are a luxury. Let's be quite honest, they're a luxury to be able to do those things. That's what you can start to do once you start to make money, you start to have success. That shouldn't be the default thing, but I mean, I think I'm preaching to the choir. That's kind of a silly,
You're totally
but I
preaching to the
mean,
choir,
we
choir that, and I remember in my new employee onboarding back in the 1990s when I was running things, I'd say to people when I'd meet all the new employees and I'd take them through and like, our number one goal is to keep our customers happy and make a profit. And if we're not making a profit and keeping our customers happy, everything else fails. Everything else falls to bits. And you can afford to be generous and afford your job and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think I noticed how you laughed when I used the word imposed, and I was expecting you, because the one thing is you don't impose your integration on people. You consult with them and you choose. And as you say, it's stretched slightly off ego, although you very cleverly tangented back into it, because actually people were proud of being involved in a company. They got personal pride out of something that they were collectively associated with, even if they didn't individually participate.
No, but it was hilarious because we tried so hard to get people involved, and like I don't see people were reluctant. But, not everybody wants whatever. Nobody has time. Not everyone wants to go hang out with the orphanage kids and stuff like that. So I understand that. But I was surprised by that there was this whole like positive thing connected to it, even though they weren't involved with it. That's what surprised me, because obviously the people that we all did it, we all enjoyed it, and we felt good, and we enjoyed each other's company. But I was thinking it's such a small group of people, but that it actually went in. I thought that was fascinating. Actually, I thought that was actually fascinating.
And if we are talking to people who are leading or will one day lead organizations, it's worth remembering that it's way more powerful to have sort of corporate social responsibility that is driven by people who actually want to be involved, rather than an order from the boss. Right, now we're going to go and pick up litter together as a company, and you've got people who are doing it because you told them to, rather than because they want to. And people will be more proud if they know that the people who did that wanted to do it rather than had to do it. And that's an important lesson. But don't start doing all your charity stuff before you've broken the back of achieving a business that works. I think we've pretty much got to all the things I wanted to share on this topic. But is there anything else to say that we haven't said? Maybe ego with business partners, with vendors, customers, other people you deal with.
I mean, look, it's like we started the thing talking about ego. It's really just understanding personalities and personality types. I mean, I think the ego in particular is can be a dangerous thing. I mean, and you just need to be aware that that's what drives it. But I also have found many times in business that it's an opportunity. Like knowing that your client has a huge ego is awesome. Man,
yes,
you're the best.
absolutely.
God, you're so smart. You're freaking like you crush it. Like, I mean, do they realize how good you are? Like, in just so take advantage of, like, it's just understanding how people are different. It should be is the takeaway for me.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I said at the beginning, self-awareness is important. Understanding your own personality is really important. Understand, and if you've got a big ego, then know when you can let it out of its box and when to put it in its box. And understanding clients, because I was thinking you were going to say, if a client has a big ego, you have to like manage it because it's so annoying. But on the other hand, as you spotted, if they've got a big ego, maybe it's much easier to sell to them because you know what buttons to press in order to make them happy. And some clients will want to.
But the same is true with everybody. It's like it doesn't necessarily, like, big ego doesn't necessarily have to be equated with something negative. It's really what can you work within a certain type of personality to achieve what you want to achieve in business. I mean, and really, I think that's the lesson, because otherwise you have the ego if you're not trying to focus on, because it almost like bothers you, right? That guy has an ego, so but maybe that's your ego. That's bothering you with that other person's big ego. Like, recognize the other person's big ego and take advantage of it, basically.
Yeah, and there's also a slightly more subtle point here, which is you have to be careful about superficial impressions, that sometimes what appears to be a big ego can reveal insecurities. Now, I remember there's one series of questions that you can ask about a potential client, particularly, but I'm sure it's true of employees and everyone else, is like, what do they say they want? And standard Ladybird book of ABC 101 sales, like, ask the client what they want and listen. So is what do they say they want? And they can also be, what do they think they want and what do they really want? And sometimes the clients are also quite unself-aware. So you need to look at what people do and how they behave as well as what they say, because it's really like putting pieces in a jigsaw, understanding a human being. People can be quite complicated, and what you see in the first meeting is different from the image they present isn't the real them.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Kimon, do you have a sort of closing thought to say about the role of ego in business? I feel that we've wrung all the juice out of this particular.
I think we did. I think we covered it. No, I mean, look, in summary, I think having a bigger ego is actually very valuable for a lot of aspects of being an entrepreneur and being a successful entrepreneur. So that's a very positive thing. It's just being aware of it, that it's I think it's unlikely that you're going to be in this, like, a 1% of the 1%, uh, in your ability to then just drive things forward without actually having other people around you. And if you want to have other smart people around you that are engaged, you're going to have to give them some of the spotlight. You're going to have to give them some of the control, some of the power. And the sooner you recognize that, I think the sooner you're going to be successful as an entrepreneur. I mean, I think that don't let a big ego isn't a bad thing. Just don't let it limit you, would be my summary.
Yeah, and I think just to close, I think it's a very good point on which to close. Remember that even if you are the sort of person and you want you to be in the spotlight, let the organization you've founded be incredibly impressive, and the glory of the great company you've built shine a little bit on you. And if you just put yourself center stage all the time, probably your organization will be has a lot less chance of success than if you get everyone focusing on the purpose of the organization, that you're doing great work, you've got happy clients, whatever it is that you do. So I think, let your ego be massaged and polished and burnished by the success of the organization, rather than make it the Richard Lucas or Kimon Fountoukidis show. And on that note, I think we'll just thank our listeners, thank the people who edit it. If you like this, do share it, forward it to a friend. And if you've got any topics you'd like us to cover, get in contact with us via the MBN. Thank you very much indeed.